I am going to do a video on writing up lease violations. Talked a bit about it. I've said you should do it because a huge thing that I talk to people about is enforcing the lease. But sometimes enforcing the lease involves writing up a violation. Might not amount to like an eviction notice. It might amount to a warning before you give an eviction notice. So I want to do a video on how you should write up lease violations. And so I'm just going to get right into it. The first part is you should be familiar with your lease. So if you must, pause this video, go pull out your lease and read it. You should know what's in your lease. You should know what your lease is saying, and specifically you should know what your lease prohibits the tenant from doing. Because if you're going to write up a violation, it has usually be in the lease what they're doing is violating it. So know your lease. That's the first component to this. Second, you want to gather information. So if a lease violation has been committed, for instance, let's say that there's unauthorized occupants. You want to gather the relevant information. If you have cameras, you want to get camera footage, showing people going in and out of the unit that seem to be staying there overnight that aren't on the lease. Maybe they're staying for long periods of time. You might want to have witnesses. If it's an apartment building, ask the resident manager if you have one, or other tenants if you're, familiar with them or friendly with them. Because a lot of times tenants, like the resident manager is supposed to know that. The resident manager is supposed to keep track of that. But some tenants might say, hey, other people are living there. And it could be because maybe there's an increase of people going in and out. Maybe they're interfering with the parking. Maybe they're using more trash, things like that. But that's one kind of lease violation. Other violations usually are unauthorized pets, illegal dumping, leaving stuff in the common areas, like storing stuff or dumping stuff in the common areas, stuff like that. So you need to have evidence of it. Best evidence is witnesses, photos, and videos of it. So document that. You also want to get dates and times. So the date they've done it, the time that they did it, and then what the violation is. So you want to gather, that's like the core of information that you need. Then when you go and write up your notice, you want to put in the pertinent information. Either you're writing up a notice or you're writing up just like a warning to the tenant write up. You want to put in there, what they've done, dates and times that they've done it, supporting evidence, whether it's witnesses. You might not, some landlords don't put witnesses. They might put themselves as like a witness because tenants are really skittish about being named as a witness against their neighbor because tenants fear retaliation, which I understand. If you have a willing tenant, okay. Maybe you put the resident manager because that person's there to keep track of the properties, would be an expected witness. And then you want to put the supporting documentation. Maybe you got cited for something and it's traceable back to the tenant. Maybe you have videos or photos of the violation. So you want to put that in the notice and you want to give it to the tenant and put them on notice. And you want to describe the violation very clearly, including the part of the lease that the tenant is violating, paragraph whatever. Paragraph 10A, not allowed to do this. Here's photos of you doing it. Then you want to state the consequences of it. So you're notifying them. Maybe this is a warning before you escalate it to like an eviction related notice. So, here's the warning. If you continue to do this, or we see that you continue to do this, then we're going to enforce the lease and we'll escalate this to, an eviction notice, something like that. So you want to give them the consequence of, we're giving you a warning now, but if you continue this behavior, that's going to be the consequence for it. And the consequences vary depending on jurisdiction, depending on how the lease is written, stuff like that. Sometimes you have to give a tenant, a 3-day notice to perform or quit. Maybe you can just evict them because you've already warned them. It depends on the area that you're in. And then you want to provide a deadline. So for instance, the 3-day notice to perform or quit has a deadline, the 3 days. But if you're trying to just give a notice and maybe you don't want to proceed with the eviction or you don't want to go down that rabbit hole, but you want to just give them a notice, then you might want to give them a deadline. And that's very common when maybe there's stuff in the common areas, like, hey, you're storing all the stuff in this common area. It's believed to be yours. If you know it's theirs, then tell them you have so-and-so date to get rid of it. If the tenant comes back to you and says, that's not my stuff, then maybe you want to give a notice to the whole building. This stuff is in the common area. It's not supposed to be there. If it's not removed by so-and-so date, it's going to be disposed of. If it is a tenant's item and they're not allowed to store it there and it's theirs, then part of the consequence might be we're going to get rid of it and then we're going to charge you for the cost of getting rid of it. A lot of times leases talk about what those costs are going to be. There might be an admin fee for doing that. So you want to give a deadline for compliance, and if they don't comply and you have to do something, the consequence of them might be that they're going to get charged. Always have contact information. So, if you're a management company, you tend to have it on your management letterhead. If you're the owner, you want to have your contact information. So if they want to talk to you about it, they know where to reach you. That's kind of obvious, but some people, they don't have that. And if it's going to be an eviction related notice, then you want to make sure that you're doing that correctly. So that you might want to talk to an eviction firm about. Depending on where you're at, there's rules and regulations about notices. Here in LA City, for instance, you have to file notices. So there's a whole procedure for that. A lease violation, if you're not sure how you want to enforce it or how it can be enforced, then yeah, you might want to talk to an eviction attorney and go, hey, and how do these things get enforced? If they're doing this, does this amount to an evictionable action, or does it amount to I just give them a warning? And then how many warnings is enough warnings before I have to go battle this in court with the tenant? And an eviction attorney, being in court often with these things, will have a better position to tell you this is something that you should give this kind of notice for. This is something you should write them up for. You should give them this number of chances because that's what people like to see, etc., etc. And then always maintain your records. So maintaining your records, one would include obviously the rental application and the lease. Let's say rent increase notices, those are typical records, but you also want to keep into a file all of these write-ups, because one day that might come to be that you have to go, hey, I gave the tenant ample warning. I told them numerous times not to do this. They still continue to do it. That's why we're here. I try to avoid being in an eviction court. I try to avoid going down this path. But here's the notices and here's all the evidence. So if you have an incident, on January 1st, on so-and-so year, maybe you want to have a folder with the notice and the supporting evidence and keep it there. And then if another incident happens, you create another folder for that. Technology makes it really easy and great to do all these things because you can actually document stuff much easier and keep track of it much easier. You could just have it on a folder and go, here's the folder, here's all the stuff. And then so later, if you have to enforce it, you have it kind of all organized. And that, I think, is what makes it really hard for landlords when they do lease violations is, the keeping track of all of it. And if you create a template or you have a template and you know your lease, it makes it that much easier to do it. You write it up and you give it to the tenant. And giving a tenant a warning, one is good because maybe the tenant will cooperate and then you won't have to deal with an eviction. Well, hey, yeah, I'm sorry that I violated the lease. My bad, I won't do it again. Maybe it was an accident. Maybe they really didn't mean to do it. Maybe if one of their friends did something and they didn't know, maybe they just didn't mean to offend you, or wasn't like something that they thought they would get in trouble for. But now that you've told them, they're going to be more mindful of their actions. Those are all things that can happen. And then being positive about it, a lease write-up helps because it's not so intimidating, but it does set the tone like, hey, you signed a lease. You're supposed to conduct yourself a certain way as a tenant. I'm expecting that as a landlord of you. And the tenants respond. And they, a lot of the times, tend to toe the line because they don't want to get in trouble. It's stern, but it's also more amicable than serving like a direct eviction related notice. But like all things, sometimes you have to escalate it. I am a huge proponent of enforcing the lease and putting tenants on notice of lease violations, but I also like to give tenants the benefit of the doubt, and that I think that a lot of them want to stay housed and don't want to move and don't want to go to eviction, and I'm sure landlords don't want to deal with evictions. And so I think the lease violation, the write-up, is like kind of an underutilized tool for the landlord because it does document in the landlord's favor, but it does give tenant the chance to like prove themselves or a chance to correct themselves. So I hope that was helpful. If you liked that video, you might like some of my other videos dealing with, maybe I'll link the video on like things that you should have in your lease. So if you have any vacancies and you plan to fill them and you want to know what you should put in your lease going forward, I will link that video at the end. I also have a weekly newsletter that goes out every week that has landlord news and tips. So there's a link below. Feel free to sign up for that. I think it's great and I put a lot of effort into it. Otherwise, thank you for stopping by and I will see you in the next one.